there, boys and girls, ladies and gents, theys and theirs. This is Tara Shapansky from the Polish-American Brotherhood and Adam Francisco from Be Free My Sheeple. And you're listening to the T&A Show, the Tara and Adam Show.
All right. Hey, everybody. It's been a minute since we have been on, but Tara and I are reunited for your viewing pleasure. Welcome back to the T&A Show. Today we have a very special guest all the way from Australia in the Down Under, Lauren St. James, who is a Howard Springs quarantine camp survivor. So before we get to the podcast, Lauren, if you'd like to introduce yourself, floor is yours.
Hello, I'm Lauren St. James. I'm a 26-year-old singer-songwriter and Howard Springs quarantine survivor. And I am British. I'm also an Australian citizen, and I'm excited to talk to you today.
Awesome. Now, before we get into the interview, you had mentioned before we jumped on the call that you are also half Filipino, just like Tara. That's pretty cool, right?
I am, yeah. I feel like when I'm introducing myself, there's so many things to say, half Filipino, half English, British, Australian, so much to fit in there.
That's awesome. So I'm surrounded by two beautiful Filipino ladies today. It's my lucky night, guys. So let's get into the interview. And again, as always, guys, ask questions in real time. For those of you guys who have not heard, and again, Lauren, I'm going to talk from our perspective here in the U.S., and feel free to correct me. But we have been watching from a distance the things that have been happening in Australia. And for us Americans, at least in the U.S., it's very scary, and it's almost acting like a warning sign of what we think could possibly be our future here in the U.S. And one thing that they've been doing, from my understanding, is they have these things called quarantine camps. And some people in the U.S. have referred to them as almost like concentration camps, which I think might be a little bit too, that's a very extreme way to compare it. But I would love to hear your perspective of how the hell you ended up in one. How did they target you? Why did they put you there? How did they bring you to the camps? Like, can you start from the beginning?
Yeah, sure. So over a year ago, probably about a year and a half ago now, my sister applied to a PhD in Perth that she got accepted onto, fully funded, and they wanted her to start October 2020. And at the time we were in the midst of a lockdown, but we thought, it'll blow over in a few months. October 2020, we'll be in Australia. That obviously didn't happen. And we knew if we wanted to get in, it would be very expensive. We'd have to do a 2-week quarantine that we had to pay for ourselves. So we thought, okay, let's wait this out. And then sort of go forward a year later, and it's the same situation. So I wanted to go with her to support her and also just to see Australia. And we just thought, let's just go. We've been waiting a year and a half. It doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon, especially in Perth. They've been like the strictest the whole time. So we got in touch with a travel agent called Alan Lamb, who came very highly recommended. He's based in Sydney, and he's basically been helping a lot of people get over from all over the world into Australia and kind of get into these quarantine camps and just kind of manage all the restrictions and all the rules that are just ever changing, so that you kind of don't have to worry about it as much yourself. And he got us booked onto a DFAT flight, which is basically a repatriation flight for those Australian citizens that want to come back into the country. And as I said, me and my sister are dual British and Australian citizens. So we were very lucky that we were able to get on one of those flights, being that we're citizens. So yeah, I know that you can book yourself onto a DFAT flight. Like, you don't need an agent, but we just wanted to kind of put our trust into someone that really knew what was going on the ground in Australia. So that's why we used him. And basically we were going to fly to Sydney to do our quarantine, but then Sydney decided they were going to scrap hotel quarantines. So then it was like, okay, well, we can't go to Sydney because we have to quarantine before we get into Perth. And I mean, the obvious answer is like, why don't you just quarantine in Perth? But their flight caps were so low that it would have been easier to get into Sydney, quarantine there, and then fly to Perth than to fly internationally straight into Perth. Like, the likelihood is your flight would have just been cancelled because they're not letting that many people in. So anyway, we couldn't do Sydney. So then the next option was the Northern Territory, which was Howard Springs, and they're kind of like a green zone, I think it's called. So once you've quarantined there, it's very easy to get into any of the other states, especially Perth. So that's what we ended up doing.
So you basically chose almost the option of Howard Springs quarantine camp to satisfy the quarantine demands of Australia. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And but not just of Australia, of Perth particularly, because that's where we needed to be.
Okay.
If we wanted to be in Sydney, it would have been a lot easier. Like because they'd scrapped the hotel quarantine, we could have just been in Sydney. But yeah, we had to do what Perth kind of demanded of us.
And you guys weren't like, because from our perspective, we had this vision that you guys were, and I know that this might be the case with some people, but your experience, we thought that Australians were being dragged to these quarantine camps against their will. But it sounds like you chose to go there. Like you basically said, I'm going to choose Howard Springs as my destination for the quarantine. Is that right?
Yeah, no, yeah. Yeah, I don't think anyone's really being dragged. I think because, yeah, generally it it's hard to get into Australia, and people don't really do it unless they really want to or really need to. I would say I think I know that for like domestic quarantine, a lot of people that are working like in the different states in Australia, they kind of have to go through the quarantine because of their job. But at the same time, they have chosen that job. So it's just part of the package and they get paid. They like their quarantine gets paid for, and I'm pretty sure they get like a
Mm.
wage for the quarantine. So it's just part of the job. But yeah, no one really gets dragged there.
Okay, that's good to hear. And how long were you in Howard Springs camp for?
2 weeks. I think that's the only option at the moment for quarantine. That's what's sort of the standard there.
Okay, so one of the guys that we follow on YouTube, his name is Tim Pool. I'm not sure if you're familiar. His name is Tim Pool, Tim Cast. He goes by on YouTube. He basically showed Instagram, and there are girls that were at Howard Springs posting like bikini photos. He called it the hot babes of Howard Springs, but then he showed photos where it made it look really scary. I think Tara had pulled some of the images up where the workers, the employees were in hazmat suits. People were arrested apparently for escaping the camp. What do you think is closer to reality? Here it is. Tara's pulling it up now. These are the Howard Springs hot
Yeah.
babes, and he assumed that this was a propaganda effort by the Australian government to make it seem like the quarantine camps weren't that bad. So, since you were actually there, what represents
Yeah.
Howard Springs more? These bikini babes or the guys in the hazmat suits? Or is it a combination of both?
I would say it's a combination of both. I personally didn't see any like hot bikini babes, but me and my sister were out on our verandas sunbathing a lot in our bikinis. Um, we're not the type of people that then go and sort of like post all these thirst traps on social media, but I was looking at posts as well, and I could see that there were influencers, kind of just using the quarantine as bait for people, and look at how amazing my body looks, and so yeah, people were definitely doing that because it was great weather. You could sunbathe on your veranda. You had to sunbathe with a mask on, which was really annoying because you just would end up with like a tan line there. But equally, yes, the hazmat suits were 100% real. They were just very, very strict, taking it very seriously. If they saw that you didn't have a mask on when you were out on your veranda and you weren't eating or drinking, they would tell you off and make sure that you put it on. But that's kind of as scary as it got, really. It wasn't that. It looks scarier than it is, I agree, because I remember like googling the place before we went in, and it looks like a boot camp, and it looks very clinical. But yeah, I think it's not as scary when you get there. Like, people are generally very friendly, or the nurses were really lovely and like wanted to know where you'd come from, where you were ending up, like which state you were going to go to afterwards, and what your story was. So, yeah, I think, it can be a bit intimidating. And if you don't follow the rules, like the mask wearing, or you try to escape, they're not going to be happy with you because obviously there's this huge production going on. Like, it's a big project where, loads of people are trying to get into their state. And if anyone breaks the rules, you're kind of ruining it for everyone. We paid for 2 weeks here. It's not fun. And if anyone sort of tries to like get you to break the rules, sneak into their room and have like a late night hookup, like it just ruins it for everyone. So yeah, because like if you get caught doing that, you either get kicked out or you have to do another 2 weeks. Um, and you get fined. And I just, yeah, I didn't really understand like the rule breakers, to be honest. I just think, what's the point? Like, just get through your 2 weeks and just follow the rules. Because even I had like some guys messaging me on Instagram from Howard Springs that had seen my post that I posted on Instagram from Howard Springs, and saying like, oh, like if you're feeling spontaneous, like I'm here for another week, you can come to my room or whatever. And I just couldn't believe it, to be honest.
What are your
Yeah,
thoughts
I
on?
guess,
I'll just jump in there. Since I was showing the article about in a couple days ago, that they had a trio that was arrested for breaking the rules, and so that's what If it seems like people are there against their will, because if they're being arrested for leaving, that's when it seems like a detainment camp. What are your thoughts on this trio that was arrested for leaving the facility?
I don't obviously personally know like what their story was, like why they were there. But I think what people sort of do is they say, okay, I have to go to this quarantine camp to get where I want to be. But if I sign in and, they think I'm there and then escape, like they'll never find me again, and I'll be in the state that I want to be in, and everything will be fine. So I have a feeling, people go in knowing that they're going to try to escape, thinking, it might work, let's just try it. Because, yeah, as far as I'm aware, no one has to go there, like, without wanting to go there. And you have to pay for it as well. So I don't think they would force you to do that.
how much does it cost to go since you're paying for it out of your own pocket? What are the rates? Like, how do they charge for that?
It's 3,000 Australian dollars.
I'm trying to do the math right now to see what that is in US dollars. Australian
Yeah.
dollars to US dollars. Let's see. So $1 Australian is equal to 0.71 US dollars. So that's about 2,110 US dollars. Okay. And that's for the 2 weeks. That covers room and board and everything, and the food and everything you guys get there.
Yes, exactly.
How was the food? Because I saw that you sent me a photo of yourself, and it looked like the food was pretty good in that photo that you sent. What did you think about the food there?
Yeah, I would say generally it was really nice. There was definitely some meals that we weren't fans of, and I think, everyone's taste is different, so that's just bound to happen. There was a lot of salads, which I really liked. We had a prawn laksa bowl, which was delicious, and like a bibimbap salad one day. I think like one of the less good meals was the chicken parmigiana. It was kind of just like a big, like greasy, sloppy mess. So yeah, there were definitely some evenings where we were like, oh God, this isn't good. And then, you sort of have to just rely on the snacks that you have in your fridge or whatever, or maybe you'd saved like the bread roll from the day before, so you can try and make a meal out of that. And you can also order from the local grocery stores, but it does take like 1 to 2 days for that food to come. Um, but yeah, generally, I'd say they were very healthy options. All the food is made by this catering company that seemed just sort of very like down to earth, sort of home cooking, and you could tell they'd thought about your dietary needs, like putting vegetables with everything and meat and potatoes. And they had good vegan options and vegetarian options as well.
Wow. I mean, so have you seen some of the coverage from the U.S. about the quarantine camps in Australia? Have you seen kind of what people here have been thinking or saying about it? Are you aware of that from that perspective?
I'm not. I don't really watch American news.
Yeah, that's probably for the best. It just, I mean, for us, it seems like this is really good for me to hear because it seems like they're not as bad as some of the media is making it seem. But at the same time,
Mhm.
I'm thinking that it's still a crazy concept that you would make citizens have to be isolated in these, well, look like prisons. Again, you said it yourself, they do look very clinical. That they have to stay there sunbathed with masks on, and if they take it off, they get yelled at by an authority figure. My head just can't wrap around that happening in the U.S. And but at the same time, you're making it sound like it wasn't as bad as the media makes it seem it was. Do you know what I'm saying? This definitely
Yeah,
seems to
no,
be a very
yeah,
there's a disconnect.
yeah. I think, the Australians are probably taking it the most serious out of every other country, which, it's very intimidating. But at the same time, now that we are in Australia and in Perth, it feels very worth it because we're pretty much free. Like, there's pretty much no COVID in Perth. Maybe a few cases, but you can do everything. It's like it doesn't exist here. There's nightclubs, concerts, no social distancing, no mask wearing. So, we feel extremely lucky, especially coming from England, where we sort of like 7 months out of 2020, we were locked down. So that was more than half of the year. Um, so yeah, and the Omicron variant now is making it seem like they could go into another lockdown, and I don't think that's going to happen here in Perth. So yeah, they've been very strict, but it does seem like kind of a good move at this point. But yeah, at the same time, like I do feel sorry for Australians that can't afford to get back home because it is expensive, and it's, as much as it doesn't look like a luxury, it's a luxury that I've been able to afford, and a lot of people haven't been. And yeah, I would say because as well, I would in England, we've been so used to being locked down. Me and my sister were like, okay, 2 weeks in lockdown, we can do this. We've done it 3 months at a time. We're very used to not leaving the house, getting into a routine. You wake up, you have breakfast, you do a workout, you have lunch, you watch some Netflix. Next thing you know, it's bedtime. So we just did that for 2 weeks, and just were very mentally prepared for that. And the weather helped, I think, to be able to sit on your veranda in the mornings and in the afternoons, like, was really nice just to get some fresh air. I know that in other states in Australia, you are put into a hotel quarantine where you can't open a window, you can't like go out for
Oh my God.
exercise, you can't go out, there's no balcony. Yeah, like the that to me sounds hellish. And you're in just one room, whereas like me and my sister, we had a room each, and we could go from one room onto the veranda into her room and back and forth. So we kind of had like two rooms together with the balcony. It felt a lot more freeing, I suppose.
I think though that the
Yeah, you said.
concern,
Sorry.
I think the concern though that like I would have and other, I guess, Americans would have with such a facility, in a sense, existing, because when you have versus like if we were to be quarantining in different spaces, because at what point, for example, like the three that escaped, we don't know in a sense what they were escaping from, because like to your point, you're like, oh, why would you pay $3,000 and then try to escape from it? But these type of facilities, like in the past that we've seen, taken learning from history, from even in Pol Pot, they had detention centers that were made from the school. Then also going back to, they weren't called concentration camps back then, but they were like work labor camps. When you have the concept of a concentration camp, of course, like bears in mind the horrors of the Holocaust, but in its actual like concept, it's when you have a certain something that's you have everybody concentrated on. So at what point can it then start to be used for your political adversaries, so those who are breaking the rules to then be sent there? Because the three that were in a sense escaping, they had tested negative for COVID. So at what point could these facilities then be used for those who are the rule breakers? And that's the concern from the American perspective. Like I think from Britain and Australia have a very similar approach when it comes to liberties, which is very different than in America. In America, our liberties are innate to us, as opposed to in the history of Britain and also Australia, it's the liberties have been given to by the government, versus in America we don't have liberties are given to us by the government. We're born with them, and that's the relationship that we have with our individual liberties.
Yeah, so I suppose, I don't know, because I know that some, like for people that break the rules, e.g., try to escape, sometimes they'll put you back into the camp, um, like to do the quarantine again. Sometimes they'll just kick you out of the state completely, because it's like, if you're not going to follow our rules, you can't quarantine here. Um, I think because they've come into the camp to quarantine, even though you test negative, they still kind of believe, you could still have it. So you need to go through the whole 2-week quarantine. So if you escape, you could have caught it. So then you need to do it again. So I think it's, yeah, as I said, they're being really strict. I think it's one of those things, don't enter it if you are gonna try and escape it. Um, as I say, as far as I'm aware, I don't think anyone gets put there as, I don't think it's used as like a prison,
Um,
Um,
my question is everybody in the camp vaccinated? Like to get into Australia, I believe you have to be vaccinated. So is everybody in the camp not only vaccinated but also tested negative too? Is that right?
Right. So there were some people in the camp that weren't vaccinated. I know this because one of our neighbors wasn't. And so she basically was trying to get back into Sydney. Now I know that if you're vaccinated, if you're double vaccinated, you can get into Sydney without having to quarantine. But because she wasn't double vaccinated, she went to the Howard Springs quarantine to then get into Sydney. So you don't have to be vaccinated to get into Howard Springs. We personally, me and my sister, because we flew on a Singapore Airlines VTL flight, which I think stands for Vaccinated Travelers Lane, we had to be vaccinated to get onto that flight. So, but that was fine. We were already double vaxxed anyway. Um, so yeah, I think the Howard Springs site is used for both vaccinated and non-vaccinated people.
Mm. And I'm just curious, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but when it came to you getting vaccinated, what was your personal motivation for doing so? Like, what was in your mind, this is why I'm going to do it?
It was because of probably just all the lockdowns that we were subjected to in the UK. I kind of just wanted it to be over. And I just felt like the quicker we all get vaccinated, the sooner we can move on with our lives and get out of lockdown and see our family, especially like our grandparents. And yeah, I suppose I didn't really have many fears about the vaccine. I've had many other vaccines in my life. Maybe, I don't know if that was just me being naive and not really caring and just wanting to get on with my life. But I was kind of just like, give it to me as soon as I can have it.
And before we get into the question by Devon, do you think that, because here in the US, I'm just going to be very upfront, the vaccine is very politicized. There's basically two major sides to American politics, right wing, left wing. One side is very against and one side is very for. Do you find, since you're a dual citizen, in England, in the UK and Australia, is it politicized there as well? Like what's the reason why some people are not being vaccinated in Australia and the UK?
I think in my opinion, it's less to do with politics and more to do with your experience of the past year and a half to 2 years. So in England, we've been so affected by COVID. There's been so many cases. We've had so many lockdowns that for us, it was like, get me the vaccine now. This needs to end. Whereas in Australia, they haven't had it as badly. They haven't had nearly as many cases. So, I mean, I think Melbourne was in lockdown for quite a lot of 2020, but like Perth barely had any. They maybe had like 1, 2, or 3 week lockdown. So I think the mindset in Perth, especially, and all of Australia is, why do I need to get the vaccine? Like I'm living my life as I was before. Our borders are closed, but other than that, I'm fine. So I think there's just not as much of an urgency to get it as there is in the UK and maybe in America as well.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of pressure tactics that they're using. So let's get back to our question on the screen right now. This is from one of our most loyal viewers, Devon McKenzie. He is a VIP status. So thank you, Devon, for joining us. A question for Miss Lauren. He's such a polite gentleman. I love this guy. Have you tested positive for COVID before? And how many weeks did you have to quarantine afterwards? Yeah, so are you a COVID survivor as well?
No, so I've never tested positive for COVID, thankfully. I got vaccinated, sort of my first one I think was in June and the next one was in August of 2021. Yeah, so I've managed to make it sort of over a year without catching COVID. And then once I did get the vaccine, I sort of pushed the boundaries a bit more. Like I went clubbing in the UK, and I caught the common cold, but I didn't catch COVID. So I sort of feel like my vaccine is working.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And they say that the common cold is a type of coronavirus. So you technically did have a coronavirus, just not this coronavirus specifically. Um,
Yeah.
Awesome, Tara. If you want to pull in more questions off the screen, feel free to keep pulling those in. We'll get to those. But let's switch gears for a
Absolutely.
minute. Let's talk about you're kind of a celebrity. I don't know if everyone on the live stream realizes this, but we kind of have a celebrity on our hands. Lauren St. James is actually a music artist, up and coming music artist. She's got her music on iTunes. I've seen her video on YouTube. She even has music on TikTok. So I'm going to make a video using one of her songs to help promote her. Tell us about your music career, like what kind of music you do, where we can find you for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I do sort of pop music, pop R&B, and EDM as well. I've started releasing my own songs in December of 2019, which was like just before coronavirus happened. And luckily, I'd had sort of all my music videos ready and all the songs ready, so I could just kind of release sort of as the pandemic was going on. Um, I actually did a degree in songwriting a few years prior to that. So that was 3 years of studying songwriting, music theory, music business, guitar, piano, vocals. And we had to write 3 songs a week. So I got really good at just sort of getting the songs out and developing my artistry. So yeah, I'm on Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, Pandora, Amazon Music, all the main streaming platforms under Lauren St. James. Most recently, I've been releasing a lot of EDM songs. I originally started with like more pop songs. I know that Adam, you were listening to Gold earlier. That was my first release. But shortly after releasing, I just got a lot of dance producers messaging me saying, could you top line this track and put your vocals to it? So that's sort of what I've been focusing on in the last year, because the EDM scene is just huge. It has been for a while, but like especially at the moment. So yeah, it's all very exciting. Oh yeah, you found my Quarantine Crazy video.
Yeah, I just
So I
found this
made that.
on YouTube. Yeah. So tell me, what is this
Yeah,
song?
I
It
made
says it's
that.
called Quarantine Crazy. What's it about?
Well, it's about going quarantine crazy.
And you do all the lyrics, you write the lyrics, you sing all of it.
Yeah, I wrote the whole song, melody and lyrics, and then I got my friend to produce it for me.
That's pretty good. That's awesome. Wow.
Yeah, and
So
I
yeah,
had
if you
my
guys
sister.
follow.
My sister was filming those clips on Snapchat. I wanted to kind of use Snapchat filters to give it that sort of social media, like stuck at home vibe, because that was kind of what we were all using, was social media, just to kind of make like a bit of a time capsule of what we were all going through, you know, going a bit quarantine crazy, stuck in the house, not getting out of bed until sort of 4 p.m. or something, and baking banana bread, stuff like that. So yeah, I made it all in lockdown, released it in lockdown, and I just found a lot of people really like related to it and really enjoyed it.
That's awesome. That's really cool that you put that. And I like the Snapchat filter idea. I think that's really super creative. Um, have you been to the U.S. recently during COVID times? Have you been able to visit the U.S. at all?
No, I haven't. I'm not even sure sort of how easy it is to get in right now.
So as of now, since you're double vaccinated, you're not. So let's back up. I am unvaccinated, but I'm also a U.S. citizen. So right now, if you are unvaccinated but you are a U.S. citizen, you can go into the country if you take the PCR test within 1 day of your flight. So for me, vaccination status is pretty much irrelevant. But for you, because you're a foreign national, they call you, uh, you also need to take the same test, the PCR test. But because you're double vaccinated, you're allowed into
Hmm.
the country.
Adam, remember
We
actually
don't have any
Yeah.
quarantines.
when they were when I went to Mexico the other month with you guys and everything, they had just changed the rules for those who are not U.S. citizens. As of November 8th, you have to be vaccinated in order to come into the U.S. Not only just to travel to the U.S., but also to even transit through. So they do. If you're not a U.S. citizen, you have to be vaccinated even just to have a connection flight through the U.S.
Hmm.
That's crazy. But yeah, I mean that's the thing. And I've been reading the comments through our channel right now, um, and it's so interesting to me because the way that we as Americans view things like quarantine camps, we have such a negative perception of it. Like we are completely against the idea of a quarantine camp. We completely see quarantine camps as an absolute overreach. So when somebody like you who's been there and has not had a horror story of an experience, I mean, I'm going to be honest, your experience, all things considered, doesn't sound that bad. That's just the reality. It's nowhere near as bad as I thought it was. Still, I would
I
never
think
want
as
to
long as you
go to a
follow the
quarantine
rules,
camp,
though.
and I would never if exactly if you follow the rules. So right now, I want to go to Thailand very badly. I would love to go to Thailand right now, but in order for me to go, because I'm unvaccinated, I would have to go into a government-approved hotel for 10 days, and I would not be allowed to leave until my quarantine is complete. So again, I have that choice. I can go. I can go to a quarantine, not a camp, but a hotel. But I personally am choosing not to go because I personally don't want to subject myself to those rules. Do you know what I'm saying? And plus, I have two little dogs who I don't think it'd be fair to them if they don't go for walks for 10 days. Uh, but from the American mindset, something like a quarantine camp, it just really goes against everything we stand for in America. And I mean, Tara spoke about it earlier. We have God given rights and liberties in America. And so to have a government like Australia telling people, in order to get to your home in Perth, the fastest way is to do this 2 week layover, $2,000 in this camp, and stay there for 2 weeks and don't break the rules. It sounds so scary to us. Do you get from our perspective, like where we're coming from?
I do 100%. And it's obviously so different depending on, am I trying to get there for a holiday? Am I trying to get there for a 4 year PhD? Because I think, if you're going for a 2 week holiday, why would you spend 10 days in quarantine? That's almost as long as your holiday. But if, like for us, my sister's going to be here for 4 years for a PhD, it's like, okay, 2 weeks in quarantine, you're going to be there for 4 years. I think it's worth it. And again, if you want to go, if you want to return home, it's annoying. But if you choose to do it, it's worth it as long as you're going to stay for a while. I think obviously everyone has free choice to go into quarantine or not. At some point, if you have an ailing family member that you need to reach and you can't do that without quarantine, it starts to feel like you don't really have a choice, because you need to get to them. But it's definitely not something that they're saying, you have to do it and we're going to drag you kicking and screaming. It is your choice whether you do it and whether you return home.
I think also there's going to be a difference when
Right.
it comes to rules are being applied to, in a sense, its own citizens versus those who are not citizens. So, like Lauren, you're a dual citizen between UK and Australia. Like, for instance, if America were to impose saying that I couldn't come back to the USA unless I was vaccinated. Like, that to me would be an overstep, because of course it's like, this is my home. I should be allowed to come into my home without restriction, as opposed to like if you have foreign guests or those who are coming for holidays, they don't have the rights that American citizens would. So I also think that there's a difference between when you're coming through as like a tourist or not as a citizen of that country versus when you're just coming from abroad.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that there are plenty of very angry and upset Australian citizens who are stuck abroad and can't get home, because maybe they can't afford the quarantine or whatever it is. They feel like my country's turned its back on me. It's not letting me in. I have to pay rent in another country that I don't want to be in because I can't return home. And I really feel for those people. It's not a great situation, and I think the government are going to get a massive backlash from that.
Yeah, that's happening with Canadians too right now. There are a lot of Canadians down here in Mexico because Canada recently imposed vaccine mandates for even domestic travel. So if you want to get on an airplane or train in Canada, you have to be vaccinated. That mandate came, I think, a couple weeks ago. So a lot of Canadians, they left before that deadline. They came down to Mexico, and now they're kind of stuck here. But ultimately, as we know, it's December now, and winter is about to come in Canada. So a lot of those Canadians are happy to be in Mexico because they get warm weather. And down here in Mexico, there's no vaccine mandates. People do wear masks here, but to get into the country, you don't need to be vaccinated. They don't even ask for a PCR test, which I think is a little crazy. But you know what? God bless Mexico. We got a comment here from Mitchell Lance. We have quarantine camps in the USA, $350 per day hotel stay for non-citizens, all paid for by U.S. government, with one catch: must enter illegally or fresh out of prison, not clear deportation or stay. So yeah, what Mitchell's talking about, Lauren, is that we have, how do I phrase this gently for the YouTube censors? We have very broken borders right now for our country. And as you probably have heard in the news, we have a flood of illegal migrants coming through our southern border. And under the Joe Biden administration, Joe Biden, our president, we basically take those illegal migrants and we send them around the U.S. in the dark of the night, and we give them nice hotel stays, and we're not forcing them to get vaccinated or even take tests. It's very crazy, but that's what Mitchell, I believe, is referring to. I hope Tara, did I interpret that right?
Yeah, I was just thinking because like I'm planning to go South America next year for probably like a month or two for backpacking, and then I figured if they'd like change the rules on me to come back into the U.S. that saying that you need to be vaccinated, I know a little spot around the border that I can just cross over into Yuma and be perfectly fine to get back into the country.
Yeah, that's
Oh my
that's the one
goodness.
thing that makes Australia so different than the U.S. is that you guys don't really share land border with anybody. So you guys, in order to get into your
Mm.
country, you kind of need to have an airplane or a
Actually,
boat.
even for what I
Yeah.
heard with Australia, like if you're looking to immigrate into Australia, they have islands that they vet immigrants who are looking to I guess go to Australia. Like if you that's where they would vet refugees offshores, not even in Australia. They vet them offshores on these islands before they even allow them to come into Australia.
Wow,
Okay, it's like not something
that's
I knew
crazy.
about. Wow.
So Lauren, what is your plan for 2022? Do you plan on staying in Australia? Do you plan on going back to the UK? I mean, what do you see in your near future?
I do plan to stay in Australia at least until sort of mid 2022. I think my family are hoping to come and visit us as well. Um, Sort of, I don't know. I think Perth initially, a few months ago, was saying were hoping to open the international borders in February 2022. But now with this Omicron variant, I have a feeling that's going to get pushed back. So I know that like my mum and my grandma, they were hoping to come visit maybe in April or May 2022. We'll see if that happens. If it doesn't, I'll probably sort of be wanting to go to England so that I can see them sort of at least once a year, you know. But then also, I've got to think, what are the restrictions to then get back into Perth? If I leave, am I going to have to do another 2 week quarantine to get back in? Because that wouldn't be ideal. And I'm going to have to wait and see what happens with the restrictions. And hopefully, if I wait it out a bit, quarantining will maybe go away and it'll just be more about whether you're vaccinated or not. And then I can hopefully get in a lot easier.
So I mean, everything you've said about Howard Springs, you'd prefer to obviously avoid a Howard Springs again? Is that right? Like, you definitely don't want to go back to that situation, right?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't awful, but no one really wants to be sort of locked in one space for 2 weeks and then have to pay for it. It's it's not ideal. I'd much rather be able to get straight in and just be free. So I would do it again if I had to and had the money ready to do so. But ideally, I would not like to do that again.
Right. And yeah, I'm sure you have to pay up front for the whole $2,000, right off the bat, right? Just to get into the door.
Well, you don't actually have to pay up front. You pay afterwards, and they do
Oh,
have payment plans, so you can sort of pay a certain amount over, I think, 12 months. And I'm actually still waiting to get the invoice. Apparently, it can take quite a few months after you've left for them to actually invoice you for it, which I suppose is kind of nice. But then, one day it'll come through in the emails.
I wonder what happens if you don't
oh wow.
pay.
Yeah, probably nothing good. I feel like Australia is very officious. So, if you don't pay, they'll probably whack you with a big fine and put you in jail or something. I don't know. I
I
don't
wouldn't
want to
be
find
surprised
out.
if they arrest you. I mean, they arrested these guys for escaping. So
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Um, Lauren, do you know, is Australia recognizing natural immunity in any level? Like, if you've had COVID and survived, is there any form of recognition of that?
No, then that it doesn't really seem to be what they're talking about, especially because the cases have been very low in Australia. I think, they're not looking to get herd immunity, and they're definitely not on their way to herd immunity because statistically barely anyone's had COVID here. And yeah, I think they'd rather just not have COVID at all. I think it's kind of quite a naive aspect to have, like outlook to have, because you can't
Yep.
really live without COVID. Like, this is something we're just gonna have to live with, in my opinion. It's not going away, but they're still of the mindset of, let's just lock everyone out, not let the virus in. In the meantime, try to get as many people vaccinated as we can, and then hopefully the vaccines will work, basically.
Yeah. So, Tara and I, we live in Florida in the U.S. I don't know what you've heard about Florida, but Florida has taken have you heard about Florida with
Freedom.
COVID?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So Florida has taken an opposite approach as Australia, where we basically did not have any lockdowns or quarantine. We have none of this stuff pretty much since the first 2 weeks of COVID. Florida's basically been wide open the entire time. Gyms, hotels, no mask mandates, no vaccine mandates. And the interesting part is, fast forward to today, early on in the pandemic, we got slammed. We had, the highest cases in the country. We had the highest hospitalization rates in the country, all that stuff. But fast forward to today, we now have the lowest case rate in all of the US. And I believe that's
Mm.
because our approach did the herd immunity approach. Again, I'm not an expert in this stuff. Contact the WHO.int as well as CDC.gov for countervailing medical views. But from my understanding, it appears that Florida, by taking the approach of we're just going to live with COVID and we're just going to accept it to the face, a lot of people in Florida probably already had COVID. And now, fast forward to today, it seems like in combination of vaccines and combination of natural immunity, it appears that most Floridians have probably already been exposed to some level of COVID. So,
Mm.
two different approaches. I guess time will tell which result is going to be better. I am going to guess Florida's result is going to be proved to be better because, as you mentioned earlier, COVID's probably something that we're going to have to live with globally on a global level. So if you're a country that has done everything you can to avoid cases spreading, good on you. But also, I think it might be inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to know what the death rates are or were in Florida while they were going through the sort of main waves of COVID. Because obviously you've just sort of got to
Yeah.
weigh up, obviously a certain amount will end up with herd immunity, but a certain amount will die. And I think that's kind of what Australia is maybe more trying to avoid is, you could go that route and get there, but you'd lose people to the virus as well. So yeah, I'd just be intrigued to know the numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely, guys, I don't have the fact checks here in front of me right now, but we'll definitely look that up. And when I'm out of YouTube jail, I'll post that on my YouTube community page so you guys can check that out. I'll be out in 1 week. But Tara, do you
Adam,
have any
Adam,
closing thoughts or anything that you want?
why are you in YouTube jail?
Oh my God, this is crazy, guys. Yo, so I did a live stream with a friend from TikTok. His name is America.plus. He's also my friend in real life, but I plugged his TikTok on the video. And we basically said the 2020 election was not stolen, was not stolen. And YouTube flagged me for medical misinformation. I'm sorry, election misinformation because they didn't like my tone. I think that they didn't like the way I said that. They read into my delivery. I think that now we're being censored for tone, not just words and content. So I'm in YouTube jail for a week, guys. It's very unfortunate, and it's very stupid, in my opinion. Lauren, do you
Hopefully
have
you'll
any
be out
closing
soon.
thoughts you'd like to share with? Exactly. Do you have any closing thoughts with our audience, our U.S.-based audience about Australia, and anything you want to say? The floor is yours.
Yeah, I think it would be a real shame if if America brought in these quarantine camps. I don't think they're necessary. I think Australia is a very extreme end of the scale, and they have kept COVID out, but I don't think that's necessarily the realistic way to go. I don't think you can fully keep it out. I think if you look at the UK, we don't have quarantine camps. We're all getting vaccinated, not all, but majority of the country are getting vaccinated. We are starting to live our lives almost as if they're normal. A lot of things are opening up. We're getting a lot of our freedoms back. So yeah, I hope that this new Omicron variant doesn't bring any more surprises. I hope that we're all as a globe sort of onwards and upwards, and that we don't need to bring in any more restrictions like quarantine camps.
Well said. Well said, Lauren. Well, this is Cloud, by the way, for everybody who's watching the channel. So this is my girl, Cloud. But Lauren, we really obviously appreciate you being on our and sharing your perspective about Howard Springs. I am very happy to hear that your experience was not as bad as we thought it was based on American news. So that made me feel good. Tara, any thoughts?
Lauren, thank you for joining us and giving us more of just a normal perspective from your experience. You know, we only hear what we hear on the news. I mean, for me, it's more of the concept of it, of where it can lead to going forward in the future. Because just of, like I said earlier, of the concept of what has happened in the past, I'm very sensitive to how that can go, how that can be implied into our future as well. So like if things are like nice and dandy now, like the concern is if you go against the rules, that's when you're really stirring up the waters, and you'll see what will happen. But you had a very normal experience being there, and to balance off your points, like it's true, like if you're paying to be there, it is by choice. I feel from a traveler's perspective, I would just question, you know, if you're a citizen of Australia, that I feel like you should not be infringed from coming home. But those are my overall thoughts on this conversation. Again, Lauren, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. And as always, guys, you can follow us on YouTube, Adam Francisco, when I'm out of jail, Polish American Brotherhood. And this episode is going to be live on the TNAShow.com, as well as available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So check it out there. Thanks again for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time. Be free, my sheeple. Let's go, Brandon.
All right. Perfect time for it to freeze up, too.
Are we off?
No, we're still on. My screen just froze.
Oh, we're still live.
We are still live. I was
We're
still live.